In this lesson, we're going to review how to use the quadratic formula if you're given a quadratic equation. In Algebra 1, you learned the basics of a quadratic equation, so anything where the highest exponent is a squared, that makes it a quadratic equation. The basic formula, the basic form that you use for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c. In other words, you put the squared number first, then the plain x number, then the number without a variable, and you always want it to be equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, you have to get it equal to 0 by bringing whatever's over here to the other side. We use the quadratic formula to find the x values for where the equation would cross 0. You can factor these if they're factorable. Factoring also works, but factoring doesn't always work every time, whereas the quadratic formula will work every time no matter what. As long as you take the a value, which is the number next to the x squared, put your b value, which is the number next to the plain x, those go there, and then your c value is your plain number that doesn't have any variable next to it, that goes there. And then so you just take out your a, b, and c values and plug them into the formula where they belong. Let's try some examples of those. So let's start with this one. So we have x squared plus 4x minus 5 equals 0. We have an x squared, which makes it quadratic. We have it set equal to 0, which is the way we want it. So we can take out our a, b, and c values. Okay, so the a value is the number that's next to the x squared. Well, you might say there is no number next to the x squared. Well, it's not 0 because otherwise it wouldn't be there. The number that's next to the x squared there would be a 1. It'd be 1x squared, so our a value is 1. Our b value is the number that's next to the plain x, so that would be a positive 4. And then our c value is our plain number, the one that's not next to any variable, and that would be a negative 5. Okay. So let's write out, you have your equation in front of you, so we'll do negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's our quadratic formula. That's going to give us our x values that cross the 0, where y equals 0 on the coordinate grid. Okay, so we're going to plug in our values here. So we take the opposite of b, so the opposite of 4 would be negative 4, plus or minus, and we'll talk about the plus or minus in a minute, so don't worry about not knowing what that means. B squared, so I'm going to take 4 and I'm going to square it, minus 4, that's part of the formula, times my a value, which is 1, times my c value, which is negative 5. Make sure you put that negative in there or you will get the wrong answer. And then you put that all over 2 times your a value. Well, my a value is 1, so 2 times 1 would be 2. All right. Now, the nice part about this is that this whole piece here, from here to here, you can put in your calculator all at once. Okay, so that makes it a little bit easier. So you're going to do negative 4 plus or minus, and then you're going to put that all over 2 times 1 is 2. Now that part in your calculator, you go ahead in your calculator and you do your square root button. And then notice that on most calculators, a parenthesis will show up. So you just keep going. So you'd hit 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5, and then you end your parenthesis so it takes the square root of that entire thing, and you should get 6. So 6 is what would go there. If you get 36, you forgot to hit the square root. So then you'd have to take the square root of 36, which is 6. Okay, now's when we're going to deal with the plus or minus part. Because since quadratic equations give you parabolas, or that U shape, they usually cross the axis in 2 places. So you're going to get 2 values, usually. Not always, but most of the time. Okay, so this is where we split it up, and this is how we're going to get 2 answers. One where we use the plus, and one where we use the minus. So we're going to say one of our answers is negative 4 plus 6 divided by 2. And the other one is going to be if we use the minus sign. -4 minus 6 divided by 2. Now remember that the fraction bar tells you have to do what's on top before you divide. So you're going to add these before you divide. So -4 plus 6 would be 2. Divided by 2 would be 1. So one of our answers is 1. And then -4 minus 6 would be -10. Divided by 2 would be -5. Our other answer would be -5. So our two possible answers, the two places where our parabola would cross the y equals 0, would be +1 and -5. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try not to have to write so much out this time. Let's just go ahead and say what's our A value, B value, and C value. A would be -3, B would be -5, and C would be +1. Now for our purposes, we're always going to get our two answers, but understand that when you do the quadratic formula and you're doing it in an algebra class, sometimes you'll get one answer, sometimes you won't get any answers, but for our purposes, you'll get two. Okay? All right, so we plug these in, so we do opposite of B. In this case, our opposite of B would become a +5. And then we put in the big square root, we do B squared. So we're going to do -5 squared. Remember that anytime you square something, even if it's negative, it'll turn positive. So we really don't have to worry about that negative so much because it's going to disappear anyway. 4 times -3 is our A value and 1 is our C value. And then we put that all over 2 times A. So 2 times -3. All right. So we'll do 5 plus or minus something all over -6. So now in my calculator, I'm going to do the square root, and I'm going to do -5 squared. I'm going to put an extra set of parentheses in here. So when I put this in my calculator, I'm going to do square root, and it's going to give me one set of parentheses. I'm going to put a second set in around my -5. If that bothers you, then you can just take that and realize that -5 squared is 25, and you can just put in 25 if that makes it easier for you. Like in my calculator here, you could have put 16 up here. So you can, if that makes it easier for you, then go ahead and do 25, and then put in -4 times -3, and then times 1 if you need to do that. End your parenthesis for the whole thing, and you should get it's technically 6.08, so we'll go with that. And then we split it up into our two pieces, one where we use the addition and one where we use the subtraction. So if I add these two, I get 11.08 over -6, and if I subtract them, I get -1.08 over -6. So 11.08 divided by -6 is negative, let me try that again. -1.85, and if I do the -1.08 divided by -6, I get 0.18. So those would be the two places then where my parabola would cross the y equals 0 line. Okay. I'm going to delete this one now so that I have room to do the third one. All right, you can pause the video if you needed that one. Here, notice that it's not equal to 0. So before I can pull out my A, B, and C values, I have to bring this 50 over to the other side. When I bring it over to the other side, it's going to become a -50, and then this would become a 0. So my A value would be 1, my B value would be 5, and my C value would be -50. So then you do the same thing. Plug it into your formula, A, B, C, but that's how you do that one. I'm not going to do the whole problem. Okay. I believe that is the end of the lesson. Yeah, so please check your pacing guide to see what suggested problems